The first time I saw our apartment, I didn't see her. I saw the light. It was a late afternoon in September, the city still clinging to the humid breath of summer, and the realtor fumbled with the keys. When the door swung open, a shaft of golden, dust-mote-filled sunlight cut across the bare wooden floors, so bright and clean it felt like a promise. This was it. This was the space where I would finally become the person I was supposed to be, a graduate student, an adult, someone with a life that was entirely her own. The fact that this life would include a stranger was a detail, a necessary variable in the equation of city living. We were matched by a university housing portal, a digital algorithm deciding who would share my toothpaste shelf and witness my late-night study breakdowns. I arrived on moving day with boxes filled with books and a nervous tremor in my hands. She was already there. The door was propped open, and I heard the soft thud of a heavy box being set down. I stepped inside and saw her, standing in the middle of the living room, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her hand. She was taller than me, with the kind of lean, strong build that suggested she actually used a gym membership instead of just feeling guilty about it. Her hair was the color of dark honey, falling in loose waves around her shoulders. When she turned and saw me, her face broke into a smile that was both warm and slightly shy, crinkling the corners of her eyes. "You must be Jules," she said, her voice a pleasant, mid-range alto. "I'm Kate. I figured I'd get a head start on the chaos." "Chaos is my middle name," I managed to reply, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. But hopefully the organized kind. That was our beginning. Polite, practical, and perfectly platonic. We divided the shelves in the fridge without dispute. We established a chore chart without argument. We learned each other's silent languages, the particular way I stacked my mugs in the cupboard, the specific brand of tea she needed to function in the morning, the unspoken rule that if one of us had our bedroom door closed, it was a signal for quiet and privacy. We fell into a rhythm as seamless as a well-composed piece of music. Evenings were often spent in a comfortable silence, her on one end of the sofa with a textbook on architectural history balanced on her knees, me on the other with my laptop, writing papers on postmodern literature. Sometimes we'd talk, our conversations starting with the mundane, "Did you pay the electricity bill?" and meandering into the profound under the cover of darkness, the city lights winking outside our large window. We shared stories about our families, our hometowns, our exes. I learned about the girl from her undergrad who broke her heart, and she listened, her head tilted in that attentive way she had, as I recounted the messy, drawn-out ending of my last relationship. There was a safety in those talks, an understanding that we were confidants, allies in this shared space. We were building a fortress of friendship, brick by brick, and I felt nothing but grateful for the sturdy walls. She was the perfect roommate. I would have said that to anyone who asked, and I would have meant it with every fiber of my being. There was no flicker of anything else, no subterranean current beneath the calm surface of our coexistence. I saw her as a beautiful person, objectively, in the way one might admire a stunning piece of art in a museum, something to be appreciated from a respectful distance. One night, about 3 months in, we stayed up far too late, fueled by cheap wine and the giddy exhaustion that comes after a long week. We were talking about our greatest fears. I said mine was a pervasive sense of mediocrity. She was quiet for a moment, swirling the dark liquid in her glass. "I think mine is stillness," she said, her gaze fixed on the window. "The idea that everything just stops. That you reach a point and there are no more surprises, no more tremors in the earth." I watched the way the lamplight caught the line of her neck, the gentle curve of her jaw. Tremors are overrated. I'd take a little stability any day. She turned her head, and her eyes, a deep, thoughtful brown, met mine. Would you, though? Really? Or is the possibility of the quake what makes being alive feel so acute? The question hung in the air between us, simple and yet immense. In that moment, I felt a shift, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the foundation of our perfectly constructed friendship. It wasn't a tremor, not yet. It was more like the faint, far-off sound of ice cracking on a distant lake, a signal of a change in pressure. I looked away first, suddenly aware of my own heartbeat, and made a joke about the wine going to my head. She laughed, and the moment passed, sinking back into the comfortable deep of our shared night. But something had been nudged awake. Something I had no name for and no desire to examine. The routine continued. We grocery shopped on Sundays. We took turns making dinner. We complained about our respective professors. It was perfect. It was exactly what I had wanted. So why did I start noticing the small things? The way she hummed absently when she cooked, a tuneless, comforting sound. The specific scent of her shampoo, jasmine and sandalwood, that lingered in the bathroom after her showers. The way she'd bite her lower lip in concentration when she was reading, a small, vulnerable gesture that felt strangely intimate to witness. I began to find excuses to be in the same room. If she was in the kitchen, I'd suddenly remember I needed a glass of water. If she was studying on the sofa, I'd bring my laptop out to the living room, claiming I needed a change of scenery. I told myself it was just the comfort of companionship, the natural evolution of a close friendship. I convinced myself that the warmth that spread through my chest when she smiled at me was just the glow of a fortunate living situation. I was an expert in self-deception, building a fortress of denial even as the first, faint tremors began to whisper beneath my feet. The shift did not arrive with a thunderclap. It seeped in like a slow, persistent fog, blurring the clean lines I had drawn around our relationship. It started with a laugh. Not just any laugh, but one that escaped her during a late-night documentary about deep-sea creatures. Something about a bizarre, gelatinous fish with a transparent head struck a chord of pure, unadulterated joy in her, and the sound that came out was a full-bodied, unresonant melody that seemed to vibrate in the very air between us. I found myself not laughing at the fish, but at her laugh, and then our eyes met, and for a suspended second, the laughter died in my throat. The look in her eyes was bright, unguarded, and it felt like a direct current connecting her gaze to a place deep in my core. The moment stretched, thin and transparent, before she looked back at the screen, a faint smile still playing on her lips. I, however, felt unmoored. My skin was humming. After that, the mundane became a minefield of potential meaning. A shared glance over the breakfast table as we both reached for the same jar of honey, our fingers not touching, but the intention, the simultaneous movement, felt like a collision. The brush of her arm against mine as we passed each other in the hallway, a fleeting contact that left a brand of heat on my skin long after she'd moved away. I began to collect these moments like stolen treasures, examining them in the quiet solitude of my room. Was she standing closer than necessary when we cooked together? Was that compliment about my new sweater merely friendly, or was there an appreciative weight behind it? I became an archaeologist of subtlety, digging for clues in the landscape of our normalcy. My internal world became a theater of rationalization. You're just lonely, I told myself. It's been a while since you've been with anyone. This is just proximity, a psychological trick. She's your friend. Don't be that person who ruins a good thing because you're misinterpreting basic kindness. The voice in my head was stern, logical, and I clung to it like a life raft. I doubled down on our friendship, insisting we go out with my classmates, throwing myself into the role of the perfect, platonic roommate with a fervor that felt almost desperate. It was during one of these outings that the foundation of my denial truly cracked. We were at a crowded bar, the air thick with the smell of beer and perfume. I was talking to a classmate, but my attention was perpetually tuned to her frequency, tracking her movement through the room. I saw a woman approach her, a confident blonde with a sharp smile. I watched their exchange, saw the woman lean in, her hand resting lightly on Kate's forearm. I saw Kate smile back, a polite, social smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She glanced away, her gaze scanning the room until it found me. Our eyes locked across the crowd. It was only a second, 2 at most, but in that fragment of time, something silent and significant passed between us. A question. An acknowledgement. A silent plea for an exit strategy. I excused myself immediately and wove through the bodies to her side. "There you are," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "We were supposed to head out, remember? That thing tomorrow morning." She looked at me, and the relief in her eyes was a tangible thing. "Right. Of course. Sorry, I lost track of time." She turned to the blonde. "It was nice to meet you. I have to go." We didn't speak until we were outside, the cool night air a shock to our systems. We walked in silence for a block, the sounds of the bar fading behind us. "Thank you," she said softly, her shoulder brushing against mine as we walked. "For what?" I asked, though I knew. "For the rescue." She shoved her hands into her pockets. She was persistent. I could tell. I risked a glance at her profile, illuminated by the passing headlights. "You looked like you'd rather be anywhere else." She let out a small, breathy laugh. "I was. Until I saw you." The words were simple, but they landed in the center of my chest with the force of a blow. Until I saw you. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The rest of the walk home was quiet, but the silence was no longer empty. It was full, charged with everything we were not saying. The air between us felt thick, heavy with potential energy. Back in the apartment, the familiar space felt alien, charged with a new tension. She went to pour a glass of water, and I stood in the living room, feeling utterly lost. She came back and stood beside me, not looking at me, but at the cityscape through our window. "It's nice, isn't it?" she murmured. "Having someone who just knows when you need a way out." "It is," I whispered, my throat tight. She turned to face me then, and the distance between us, usually so comfortable, felt infinitesimal and immense all at once. The light from the kitchen cut across her face, leaving one side in shadow. I could see the faint pulse at the base of her throat. I could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin. My gaze dropped to her mouth, and for a terrifying, exhilarating moment, the entire world narrowed to that single point. The thought was no longer a vague, abstract notion. It was a clear, sharp image in my mind, closing that small distance, feeling the softness of her lips against mine, tasting the night air on her skin. The desire was so sudden, so visceral, it stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't a gentle warmth anymore. It was a conflagration. I took a sharp, involuntary step back, breaking the spell. I should get to bed," I stammered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Long day." A flicker of something, confusion? Disappointment, crossed her face before she masked it with a nod. "Yeah, me too. Good night, Jules." "Good night, Kate." I retreated to my room, closing the door and leaning against it, my entire body trembling. The cool wood against my back did nothing to douse the fire she had ignited. I slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, and buried my face in my arms. The truth, which I could no longer hide from, finally rose up and swallowed me whole. Oh no, this was not friendship. This was not platonic comfort or misplaced loneliness. This was a raw, aching, terrifying want. I listened to the soft sounds of her moving around in her own room, the creak of her floorboards, the faint rush of water in the pipes, and each sound was a tiny agony of longing. I actually liked her. More than a friend. So much more. And the terrifying part, the part that sent a cold dread seeping through the heat of my desire, was the dawning, horrifying realization that I had no idea what to do about it. The morning after the bar, the air in our apartment was different. It was as if the entire space had been stretched taut, a thin, invisible film of tension settling over every surface. The easy camaraderie we had cultivated was gone, replaced by a cautious, hyper-aware dance. I woke up feeling raw, my secret sitting in my chest like a live thing, and I was certain the moment I walked out of my room, she would see it pulsing beneath my skin. I found her in the kitchen, already dressed, sipping coffee and staring out the window. The sight of her, the familiar slope of her shoulders, the way she held her mug with both hands, sent a fresh wave of longing through me so acute it felt like pain. "Morning," I said, my voice carefully neutral. She turned, and her smile was a little too quick, a little too bright. "Morning. Coffee's fresh." It began. The great awkwardness. We were two diplomats from neighboring, vaguely hostile nations, negotiating the shared territory of our home with excessive politeness. "After you." "No, please, you first." We overanalyzed every syllable, every glance. A simple, "Can you pass the salt?" became a cryptic text to be deciphered for hidden meaning. Was her tone softer? Was she holding my gaze a millisecond too long? I became a scholar of her, a detective in my own home, searching for evidence to either condemn or absolve my hope. I noted the way her brow would furrow when she was lost in thought, the specific cadence of her footsteps down the hall, the soft, sighing breaths she took just before falling asleep, a sound I could sometimes hear through the wall that separated us. That wall became a symbol of everything between us, a thin, fragile barrier that both protected and tormented me. I started avoiding her, not out of dislike, but out of a desperate need for self-preservation. I'd claimed to have late nights at the library, staying until the building closed just to minimize the hours we were both awake and conscious in the apartment. I'd take long, circuitous routes home, walking until my feet ached, dreading and anticipating the moment I would open the door and find her there. The inside of my head was a riot of conflicting impulses. One moment, I would fantasize about crossing the living room, taking her face in my hands, and kissing her until neither of us could breathe. The next, I would be paralyzed by the vision of her recoiling, of the disgust in her eyes, of the irrevocable ruin of our shared life. My emotions were a pendulum swinging violently between wild, irrational hope and crushing despair. If she texted me a funny picture during the day, my spirit would soar. If she seemed quiet or distracted over dinner, I would plummet, convinced she was bored with me, or worse, that she knew and was trying to figure out how to let me down gently. Living with her was a constant, low-grade fever of anxiety and desire. The scent of her shampoo on the bathroom towels was a torture. The sight of her favorite sweater draped over the back of the couch was a siren's call. One rainy Thursday, I came home with a headache throbbing behind my eyes. The apartment was dark and quiet. I assumed I was alone and let my guard down, shrugging off my wet coat and kicking off my shoes with a groan. I walked into the living room and stopped dead. She was there, curled on the sofa under a blanket, asleep. A book was splayed open on her chest, rising and falling with her slow, deep breaths. The gray afternoon light softened her features, and in sleep, all the careful composure she maintained was gone. She looked young, vulnerable, utterly at peace. My breath caught. I should have turned around, retreated to my room, but I was rooted to the spot, captivated. I allowed myself, for the first time, to truly look at her, to trace the line of her eyebrow with my gaze, to memorize the sweep of her dark lashes against her cheek, the perfect bow of her upper lip. A fierce, protective tenderness welled up inside me, so powerful it threatened to buckle my knees. I wanted to smooth the hair back from her forehead. I wanted to tuck the blanket more securely around her shoulders. I wanted to lie down beside her and breathe in the rhythm of her sleep. I must have made a sound, a shifted footstep, because her eyes fluttered open. There was no moment of disorientation. Her gaze found me immediately, clear and direct. She didn't smile. She just looked at me, and I looked at her, and in that silent, heavy exchange, I felt the truth pass between us, as palpable as the humid air. She knew. She had to know. I was laid bare before her, my longing a naked, trembling thing. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the gentle patter of rain against the window. Her eyes were dark pools, unreadable yet absorbing everything. I saw her gaze drop to my mouth just for a heartbeat before returning to my eyes. A faint flush crept up her neck. "Your hair is wet," she whispered, her voice husky with sleep. The mundane observation, delivered in that intimate tone, was almost my undoing. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure she could hear it. "It's raining," I managed to reply, my own voice a mere breath. She shifted, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. "Come here." The two words were so quiet I thought I might have imagined them. But I hadn't. She was watching me, waiting. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to run. But a stronger, deeper current pulled me forward. I crossed the room slowly, each step feeling like a lifetime, until I was standing beside the sofa. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. She sat up slightly, making space. Not a command, but an invitation. I sank down onto the edge of the cushion, the space between us now only a few charged inches. The air crackled. I could see the fine texture of her skin, the faint dusting of freckles across the bridge of her nose I'd never noticed before. She reached out, her movement slow, deliberate. Her fingers, warm and sure, brushed against my temple, pushing a damp strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was electric. A jolt of pure, undiluted sensation shot through me, settling low in my belly, setting every nerve ending ablaze. After the afternoon on the sofa, the air didn't just feel tense, it felt solidified. We were two insects trapped in amber, suspended in a moment that had been so violently interrupted. The unspoken thing between us was no longer a subtle presence. It had grown, metastasized into a hulking, silent beast that occupied every room, its breath hot on the back of my neck, its weight making the very floors groan. We navigated around it with a precision that was exhausting. Our conversations became masterclasses in avoidance, skirting any topic that could lead to a deeper current, any silence that could become meaningful. The internal debate began, a ceaseless, screaming chorus in my mind. It played on a loop from the moment I woke to the hazy, desperate moments before I finally succumbed to sleep. "Tell her." The voice was bold, coated in a foolish, romantic sheen. "You felt it. That wasn't nothing. She reached for you. She looked at you like that. You have to know. What if she's feeling the same torture? What if you're both cowards, sacrificing a potential happiness on the altar of politeness?" This voice painted glorious, sun-drenched pictures. A confession under the soft glow of the living room lamp, my words a gentle release. The dawning understanding in her eyes, the slow, breathtaking smile that would erase all the weeks of awkwardness. Her hand reaching for mine. Her lips, finally, meeting mine, not as a frantic, stolen thing, but as a beginning. The relief would be oceanic, washing away every doubt, every fear. We would laugh about our mutual stupidity, about all the wasted time. The beast would not be slain. It would be revealed as a beautiful creature we could finally, joyfully feed. Then, the other voice, cold, pragmatic, and dripping with terror, would answer, "You fool. You arrogant, hopeful fool." You felt it? You felt your own desperate projection. She was half asleep, she was being kind. One ambiguous moment, and you're ready to torch the entire structure of your life? Think what happens if you're wrong. This voice produced its own films, shot in grim, unforgiving detail. My confession, stumbling and raw, hanging in the air between us. The confusion on her face, quickly hardening into pity, then into a delicate, horrified understanding. The awful, stretching silence. "Jules, I don't think of you like that. You're my best friend. This is going to make things so difficult." The subsequent, unbearable politeness. The shared spaces becoming battlefields of quiet resentment. The eventual, inevitable discussion about one of us finding a new place to live. The death of our friendship, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, agonizing goodbyes. I was trapped between the promise of paradise and the threat of utter ruin, and the two possibilities felt equally, terrifyingly probable. I started scripting conversations in my head, rehearsing them in the shower, on my walks, while staring at the pages of a book I wasn't reading. "Kate, there's something I need to say. I've been feeling too weak. I can't keep pretending I don't have feelings for you. Too dramatic." That day on the sofa, before we were interrupted. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Too specific, too accusatory. Every opening line felt like a misstep, a potential trigger for the disaster I feared. I became a connoisseur of her moods, searching for an opening, a sign. If she was particularly light-hearted, humming as she made breakfast, I'd think maybe today. The moment feels right. If she was quiet, preoccupied with her own thoughts, I'd retreat, telling myself, I can't burden her with this now. I was a prisoner of my own hesitation, granting myself pardons and then immediately sentencing myself to another day of this exquisite anxiety. The approaching end of our lease began to loom over everything, a ticking clock in the heart of our shared home. It was the deadline I hadn't anticipated, a concrete event that gave a brutal shape to my abstract fears. In 2 months, this would be over. We would have to decide, renew the lease, or go our separate ways. The tension was no longer just emotional, it was contractual, logistical. It became unbearable. The beast wasn't just in the apartment now. It was sitting at the table with us, sleeping on the sofa between us, its presence a constant, screaming reminder that time was running out. I couldn't live like this anymore, in this purgatory of maybe. The weight of the secret was crushing me, making my bones ache. I was either going to speak, or I was going to shatter into a million pieces from the pressure of keeping it all inside. The decision crystallized one night, born from a simple, domestic scene that felt, for some reason, like the last straw. We were washing dishes. The silence between us was like a wall. She was scrubbing a pot, her back to me, the muscles in her shoulders tight with a strain I felt in my own body. I was drying a plate, my hands trembling so slightly I was afraid I would drop it. The air was thick with everything we were not saying. I looked at her, really looked at her, at the elegant line of her spine, the way her hair curled against the damp skin of her neck, and a wave of such profound, desperate want washed over me that it stole my breath. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't stand beside her and pretend I didn't want to turn her around and kiss her until neither of us remembered why we had ever been afraid. I couldn't live with the ghost of what might have been. I set the plate down on the counter with a soft, final click. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen. "Kate," I said, and my voice was quieter than I intended, yet it seemed to crack the silence like a whip. She stilled, her hands pausing in the soapy water. She didn't turn around, but her entire posture shifted, becoming utterly still, waiting. The water from the tap was the only sound. This was it. No more scripts. No more rehearsals. Just the terrifying, naked truth and the precipice I was finally ready to jump from. My voice, that single syllable of her name, hung in the steam-filled kitchen. It was a line drawn in the sand, a bridge burned behind me. There was no going back from the tension that now vibrated between us, sharp and crystalline. She turned off the faucet. The sudden silence was deafening. Slowly, she turned around, her hands dripping soapy water onto the tiles. She didn't wipe them. Her eyes were wide, dark pools of apprehension and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like hope. She didn't speak. She just waited, her gaze locked on mine, giving me the floor. This was my moment. My terror. I opened my mouth, but the carefully crafted speeches I had rehearsed vanished, leaving only a raw, unvarnished truth. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, the words scraping against my dry throat. This, pretending. This walking on eggshells in my own home. I gestured weakly between us, my hand trembling. This thing between us, it's become a third person living here, and I can't breathe around it. Her expression didn't change, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. She remained silent, a statue waiting for the final, defining blow. I took a shaky step forward, closing some of the distance, the damp air from the sink cooling my heated skin. That day on the sofa, I began, my voice gaining a sliver of strength from the memory. "When you touched my face," I saw her breath catch, a tiny, sharp inhalation. That wasn't nothing. For me, it was everything. It tipped my entire world on its axis. I forced myself to hold her gaze, to not look away from the potential devastation I was inviting. And I have spent every day since then trying to convince myself that I was imagining it, that it was just proximity, or loneliness, or some pathetic crush. But it's not. I shook my head, a desperate, final surrender. It's so much more than that. The words began to tumble out now, a river breaking through a dam. I notice everything about you. The sound of your laugh from the other room is the best part of my day. The way you bite your lip when you're thinking makes my heart stutter. I know the scent of your shampoo like I know my own name. And it's consuming me. This feeling I have for you. It's not friendly. It's not platonic. And I am so desperately, terrifyingly in love with you that I can't remember what it felt like not to be. The confession left me in a rush, leaving me hollowed out and dizzy. I stood there, exposed, my secret now a living, breathing entity in the space between us. I had handed her my heart, fully expecting her to let it shatter on the kitchen floor. The silence that followed was the most profound sound I had ever heard. It stretched second after agonizing second. Her face was unreadable, a mask of intense concentration. She looked down at her wet hands, then slowly back up at me. The hope I thought I'd seen was gone, replaced by a turmoil that mirrored my own. "Jules," she finally breathed, my name a sigh on her lips. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't an acceptance. It was a sound of pure, overwhelmed emotion. "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "I know it complicates everything. I know it might ruin this perfect thing we have. And if you don't feel the same way, just say it. Please. I need you to say it. I will find a way to move out. I will find a way to be your friend again. I promise I will try, but I couldn't keep lying to you. I couldn't keep lying to myself. I was babbling now, trying to fill the terrifying silence with words, any words, to cushion the blow I was sure was coming. She took a step toward me, then another. The space between us evaporated until I could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could see the rapid pulse at the base of her throat. Her gaze was searching, tracing the lines of my face as if reading a map to a hidden country. "You think I haven't been going through the exact same thing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You think I didn't feel that current between us on the sofa? You think I haven't been losing my mind every time I accidentally brush against you?" My heart, which had felt like a stone in my chest, gave a frantic, painful lurch. I was scared, too, she admitted, her eyes glistening. Terrified. This friendship, it's the most stable, good thing I've had in years. The thought of breaking it. She shook her head. But every time I tried to pull away, to lock what I was feeling back in its box, it just hurt more. She reached out then, but stopped herself, her hand hovering in the air between us. "Do you have any idea," she said, her voice dropping to a husky, intimate register that sent a shiver down my spine, "how many times I've almost kissed you? When we're making coffee in the morning, when you're laughing at something stupid on TV, when you're standing right here in this kitchen, looking at me with those eyes." The world narrowed to the space between our bodies. The air was gone. All that existed was her confession, echoing mine, and the magnetic pull drawing us together. So I breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "What are we going to do?" A slow, real, breathtaking smile finally broke through the turmoil on her face. It was a smile of surrender, of relief, of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "I think," she said, her hand finally completing its journey, her fingers gently cupping my jaw, her thumb stroking my cheek, "we're going to stop being so afraid." And then she closed the last, infinitesimal distance. Her lips met mine. It was not a gentle, tentative first kiss. It was a conflagration. It was the answer to every unspoken question, the release of every pent-up ounce of want and fear and desperate longing. It was a collision of worlds. Her mouth was soft and insistent, tasting of mint and the faint, metallic hint of the city air. My hands came up to clutch at her shoulders, holding on for dear life as the ground fell away beneath me. A small, broken sound escaped my throat, a sob of relief, of joy, of pure, overwhelming sensation. The kiss deepened, becoming a conversation more eloquent than any we had ever shared with words. It was months of stolen glances, of heated daydreams, of silent agony, all pouring into this single, perfect point of contact. Her arms wrapped around me, pulling me flush against her, and I melted into the solid, warm strength of her body. The world outside this kitchen, the future, the past, it all dissolved into irrelevance. There was only this. Only her. Only the feeling of her lips moving against mine, her tongue tracing the seam of my mouth, the feel of her heart hammering against my chest in a frantic, synchronized rhythm. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, we didn't go far. Our foreheads rested together, our breath mingling in the small space between us. I kept my eyes closed, savoring the feel of her, the new reality dawning like a brilliant sunrise. "Okay," I whispered, a laugh bubbling up from a place of pure, unburdened happiness. "Okay." She laughed too, a soft, watery sound, and pressed another kiss, lighter this time, to the corner of my mouth. "Okay." The beast was gone. In its place was a new, thrilling, terrifying unknown. But we were stepping into it together. The lease we renewed. Not out of obligation, but out of a shared, giddy desire to build something new within these same walls. The first few weeks were a rediscovery of our home, of each other. Every touch was a marvel, every kiss a revelation. The sofa was no longer a place of interrupted tension, but of tangled limbs and soft, murmured conversations that lasted deep into the night. The kitchen became our favorite room, the scene of slow dances to silent music while waiting for water to boil, of feeding each other bites of food, of kisses that tasted of garlic and wine, and a future we were only just beginning to imagine. It wasn't always perfect. There were moments of adjustment, of learning how to be lovers where we had once been friends. We had to learn new boundaries, new languages of love and conflict. But the foundation of deep friendship, of truly knowing one another, remained our bedrock. The vulnerability I had been so afraid of became our greatest strength. I learned that the most profound tremors are not the ones that destroy, but the ones that reshape the landscape into something more beautiful, more true. I learned that love isn't about finding a safe, still harbor, but about finding someone whose hand you want to hold when the ground shakes. And I learned that sometimes, the biggest risk, the one that threatens to unravel your entire world, is the very thing that leads you home. Our home, filled with the same light, the same books, the same scents. But now it was also filled with the profound, quiet certainty that when I reached for her in the dark, her hand would always be there, waiting to intertwine with mine.